Is Aldo actually done? Jose Aldo is coming off his main card fight on UFC 315 against Aiemann Zahabi, where he was on the opposite end of a unanimous decision. A very close fight though, and they went to war, but Aldo now on a 2-fight losing streak and announced his retirement from the sport. He's done this before. He said he's hung up the gloves, but he came back to the UFC, but it seems like this may be the actual end of Aldo's career for good. So we need to talk about Jose Aldo.
But before we get into that, we're Punchlock and are bringing you guys daily combat sports videos, so if you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to help support the channel. So Jose Aldo is undoubtedly one of the greatest fighters in MMA history, in UFC history, but now being 38 years old on a 2-fight losing streak at bantamweight and as well missing weight by 8 pounds coming into this fight, it's just tough to argue that he should keep on fighting, especially with him being completely out of the title picture. Originally, when he was on that good 3-fight winning streak at this weight, it was looking like he was going for a title shot, and if not, then he would retire. And then when he lost to the current champion Merab, he seemingly retired and then came back after. So it was unsure either with a win or a loss versus Zahabi if he would retire. But in this fight, we saw him looking very good in some moments for sure, being vintage Aldo, using his boxing, mixing it up to the head, to the body, and sitting down on his shots nicely, as well using his head movement that's been much improved in recent years, having a lot of success, especially early into that 3rd round, looking like he was gonna win the fight, using soccer kicks, knocking down Zahabi 2 times. But then we see Aldo's Achilles heel come in once again. After that entire flurry that somehow didn't put Zahabi out, we see him looking at the clock, seemingly so tired.
Yeah, it's kind of been an unfortunate series of events for Jose Aldo throughout his career, getting matched up with Merab Dvalishvili a couple years ago before he was ever champion, before he was on his current historic run, being one of the bantamweight goats at this point right now with the run he's on. But he came up against Merab, had a very close fight there with Merab failing like 16 takedowns, but Jose Aldo not being able to get off the fence, really be able to control that fight, even though skill for skill, it seemed like he could definitely hang with the elite of the elite, and that's still the case. And that would happen again against Mario Bautista, another controversial decision, with Aldo really doing great work with his hands, with the boxing on the feet, and then Mario Bautista really holding Aldo against the fence, and again Aldo just having no answers for it and just kind of being comfortable with sitting against the cage, not having to be too active, not really having that urgency to create any separation, to fight to his strengths, to his best abilities. And this was a war against Zahabi, but like we said, Aldo is now 38 years old. He retired once, he went to boxing, fought the likes of Jeremy Stevens, fought on some UFC Fight Pass shows, but ultimately came back to the UFC and hasn't really been treated that great from the UFC. The matchmaking hasn't been the biggest fights, the most exciting fights. There are still some guys out there that could have been great fights for Jose Aldo, the Henry Cejudos, the Dominic Cruzes, but instead he gets matched up with Jonathan Martinez. He wins that fight unanimous decision, then gets matched up with another up-and-comer in Mario Bautista, loses that fight by split decision. Then now Aiemann Zahabi, who is an older guy at 37 years old, very similar to Aldo, but is also on a 5-fight win streak in that bantamweight division, and it looked like Aldo had a brutal cut going into this fight. Like you said, he missed weight by 8 pounds and still did not look right on the scales, so he should not be fighting at bantamweight anymore. He just didn't fight at bantamweight. I guess it was a catch weight because of how bad Aldo was struggling to make weight, and that's just a sign of his body deteriorating. The wars, the mileage seems to be catching up to Jose Aldo, even though he could still perform, and like you said, there's glimpses of vintage Aldo here and there. But even early on to his career, people were saying that Aldo was past his best when he was fighting the likes of Max Holloway, Alexander Volkanovski. That was like 6, 7, 8 years ago at this point. And it seems like over the years, he's just been losing a bit more and more. Most recently now on a 2-fight losing streak, having a real problems making weight, getting to this weight, showing up to fight, even though he did put on a great performance. Zahabi was slicing him open towards the end of the fight, brutal elbows, and at points it seemed like Aldo was going to get finished with how much damage Zahabi was doing just on top, but Aldo manages to hang in there. What a career he's had, but I don't think there's any direction of really continuing. He's not going to get a title shot at bantamweight, at featherweight. There's a lot of hungry up-and-coming contenders, and Aldo now looking like he's on a downward skid, also getting a lot older, having a lot of mileage, been in so many wars that I feel like retirement is obviously the best option, but I don't know know if Aldo's gonna be one of those guys that's just gonna accept retirement, is just gonna accept being out of the cage. It seems like he's a guy that always wants to get back into this. Even his retirement itself, he in his heart of hearts really wanted to do it. But I hope Aldo doesn't return, even though he is such a fun, fan-friendly, exciting fighter. But it's just not worth it for him and his career and his future and even his legacy if he keeps losing. Obviously, those who know that Aldo's legacy really can't be tarnished regardless of what happens in the future. But you just don't want to see him go out that badly and potentially even get brutally knocked out by some up-and-comer in the UFC.
Yeah, that's why it's just tough to argue that Aldo should keep on fighting. I believe he started professional MMA at the age of 17, now being 38, so much miles on that clock, and having fought in a lot of wars, been damaged quite a bit throughout his career. And if you're not really able to get any big wins to advance you in your career, or like you said, the UFC not really giving him the fun fights that he's due, maybe like you said, Dominic Cruz or someone of his time to make exciting for their farewell fight, then what's really the point here of continuing? Aldo has done everything in his career, 2-time champion officially, and has definitely paved the way fully at featherweight, being undefeated for 10 years in his prime and ruling over that division. So it seems like unfortunately his time is really coming to an end now, and he's definitely a very beloved figure in MMA. And it's tough to see a legend like him go, a guy that's very game, is willing to fight everyone and put it all out there regardless of even if he loses against elite competition. And again, I just think it's kind of weird that the UFC would match him up against some of these guys. I get it when he was chasing for the title before his first retirement. Yeah, you got to give him the killers like Merab, like Rob Font, that are more elite in that division to get a claim for the title. But if he retired and came back and is more just looking for some fights to have, you might as well give him some fun fights and not just people looking to climb the ranks, and more so he can really just showcase his skills and have a proper farewell tour. For example, why match him against Mario Batista? Why would you want your legend who's very near retirement to go up against a guy that's just going to hold him against the cage? That's not what you want to see. And even for his retirement, there's nothing for Aldo. We saw very recently with Anthony Smith, that man got a whole 10-minute package farewell tour of everyone you could possibly know in MMA, sending him off saying he was Lionheart the greatest. But for Aldo, there's nothing. Okay, I understand maybe Aldo didn't alert them of his retirement, maybe he didn't say for sure whether he's going to retire if he lost, or maybe he thought if he won he was going to keep on going. But still, you'd think the UFC would have some stuff prepared for this case, especially for someone that's given so much to the sport. But at the end of the day, Aldo will always be remembered as a legend and one of those pioneers for MMA as well.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of maybe the lows and the downward skid that Aldo is in recent years, we're not going to forget how great of a run he was on in that featherweight division. He is a GOAT of the sport, top 5 of all time in my opinion. He's fought the who's who, he's been in massive fights, he's been in wars, he's given the fans entertainment, he's done so much and brought so much to the sport. We need guys like Jose Aldo. They are what really makes MMA such a great sport, and to see him go is definitely going to be unfortunate, but everyone has their time. Father Time is undefeated, and he should not be continuing at this point, being on a 2-fight skid, being 38 years old, and having the amount of mileage he's had on the clock. He's had a great career, but I think it's finally time to call it quits for Aldo. But let us know your thoughts in the comments down below on Jose Aldo and him seemingly retiring now from MMA. But if you guys enjoyed and want to see more on this card, check out We Need to Talk About Bilal vs JDM on screen now.